Yet another episode of Indigenization Appreciation Hour. I'm Saurav Jha, and with me is, of course, my long-term associate, Sriram Tyagarajan. Today, we are going to be focused on the Indian Army's artillery modernization projects rather. There's actually an overarching program for artillery modernization, and there are a whole bunch of projects under that. So we will go into this issue in some detail, and of course, the focus will be on whether this modernization is being driven through is being driven is being sought to be achieved via indigenous means or not. And as it stands at the moment, in the main, what we have seen till now is that we've seen basically license produced and locally assembled systems being inducted in the main in the recent past, although that is now changing and has been changing for a while. I mean, the really high value additions to the Indian Army's artillery corps have been, of course, the K9 Vajra T self-propelled howitzer, which is sort of Hanwha and L&T. L&T has basically licensed produced a system in India with 75% indigenous work packages and almost 50% overall indigenous content levels. Although naturally the barrel etc. have all come from elsewhere. And the other thing that we have that has been inducted, another high value item that has been inducted has of course been the M777 ultralight howitzer from BAE Systems USA, and 145 of those have already been inducted. And while the first 25 were imported as fully built units, the 120 of them were basically assembled in India by Mahindra. Apart from these, the Indian Army has also been inducting the Sharang, the Sharang the Sharang 155 millimeter by 45 caliber howitzer, which is essentially a 130 millimeter by 45 millimeter M46 that has been upgunned rather. And although a sort of a global competition was run for this, it was actually the humble OFB, which has now been disaggregated into 7 different PSUs, that won this tender. And as at the moment, this the supply the order for the supply of 300 such units is being serviced by AWEIL, which has been, of course, which has Armaments and Weapons Equipments India Limited, which is of course one of the newly created PSUs from DPSUs from the old OFB, and that is the one supplying these upgunned 155 millimeter by 45 caliber units, and 300 of these are on order. You would remember that there was a time when India had sought to sort of, and what are these essentially? These are basically old. These upgunned units begin as old 130 millimeter M46s in the Indian Army's inventory. That is what they begin with, and of course, one of the first things that they see is whether the carriage is cracked or not. So, which is why the order is for 300 units and not for say 700 units. Although, according to open source estimates, the number of M46s in India's inventory is comfortably over 1,000 units, perhaps. Right? And you would remember that some 180 units of that initial number were sought to be upgraded by Soltam of Israel. Soltam was given the contract to upgrade them, and that upgunning, of course, did not go very well, if it may be put that way, because although 180 units were sought to be upgraded as part of the contract, I don't think all of them were really. Let's not get into how many were or how many were not. But the fact is, because that sort of effort did not really yield the kind of results that one wanted, that a new global competition was launched to upgrade a further 300 units of the M46, the 130 millimeter M46 Soviet era field gun, to a 155 millimeter by 45 caliber howitzer standard. And it was actually the indigenous solution offered by the OFB and now, of course, by AWEIL, which won that tender. And it won not only on cost. I think it also won on technical capability, which was important, because we are talking about vintage units here, right? Which have all kinds of which sort of show all the all the sort of effects of time on them, including, as I mentioned, the fact that the gun carriages themselves might not be in the best possible state. Now the OFB upgrade of these guns is actually is proceeding at pace at the moment. And if you go by reports, at least three regiments, which is about 54 units, are already operational, right? And I'm sure, and that those reports are a bit dated now, so probably many more units are operational now. Let's not get into exact numbers. So we've had two major import, and we are talking about tube artillery systems here. We'll turn to rocket artillery systems in a bit. So you have the two of the four sort of new elements which have been introduced in the artillery core on the tube artillery side. Two have been, of course, license production, license produced, license assembled solutions, and the two remaining ones are, of course, indigenous ones. I mentioned the Sharang. The other big one on the indigenous front is, of course, the AWEL's Dhanush 145 millimeter by 45 caliber howitzer, which is a modernized version of the old FH77B0B, essentially, from Bofors, which was never inducted in enough numbers because of how things turned out. And so the one that we are talking about is, of course, the Dhanush, which is longer range, which has sort of extended the range of the legacy FH77B by another 10 kilometers. When you talk about using something like ERFB base bleed, extended range full bore base bleed ammunition. In base bleed, where at the bottom you have basically a base burner which extends the range, right? So
Yeah, there's
ERF
a
PP round, yeah,
gas released
yeah, gas
which
release,
prevents,
yeah,
combats the drag at the end of the uh,
at the end of the
artillery
round,
shell.
yeah, towards the end of the round, yeah. So with BB rounds, Dhanush is able to achieve close to 38, 39 kilometers, right? And that's in the plains. Obviously, it'll achieve longer ranges in the mountains where the air is thinner. So so the thing is that, of course, this thing has had its fair share of problems, and it is not, although the indigenous content levels are quite significant now, over 85% according to the latest estimates. The production process itself has been a little tardy because a number of issues had to be solved when rate production was attempted. But we are given to believe that these problems have now been sorted out, and this gun 2 is now this howitzer 2 is now beginning to join the Indian Army in the numbers that you need that have been contracted. Mane, it's now, according to it's going to stick to a revised schedule of delivery. Let's put it that way, because after all, only about 114 units have been ordered of this particular howitzer. So you've
Yeah,
had
so
114,
Saurav, sorry
yeah,
to interrupt, but
yeah,
just
yeah.
to
Go ahead.
clarify, can you tell us how many have been produced and actually inducted into the army?
I think at least three regiments of this too have been inducted by now. That is my sort of conjecture, because
Okay.
I have been reading reports that I had read reports over a year ago that two regiments were already operational, right? Two regiments, which is 36 units, because a typical Indian Army medium regiment has 18 units, right?
Okay.
And there are some 230 regiments of field artillery that exist, apparently, according to open sources. So anyway, the bottom line is that although the delivery of this system has been slow and sort of affected by production related issues, but those seem to have been overcome now, and under the and revised schedules will be met, and we will probably see the order for all 114 units executed by maybe another 12 months or so, or 12 to 18 months probably. Well, this is again my estimate. It's not there anywhere. It's not an official estimate or anything. So you have 114 units of this. You have 100, and you'll have 300 units of the Sharang. So that's 414 units of 145 millimeter 45 caliber systems. You will also have about you have 145 units of the 155 millimeter by 39 caliber M777, and of course you have the K9 Vajra-T, which is a 52 caliber system. So so overall, you're seeing the first 100 units of the Vajra-T, which were ordered a while ago, have obviously been inducted already. In fact, they were delivered ahead of schedule. Probably kudos to L&T for that. And but the fact of the matter remains that 50% of the gun continues to be imported. Although we are given to understand that there is work going on that front as well. So this is what you have going on the tube artillery side of things. Now, yeah, that's the K9 Vajra-T, right, coming out of the L&T plant at Hazira. Sort of, I think you have the incumbent defense minister there at the top hatch. So this is of course a system that has again been 100 more units of the system have just been ordered recently, right? I am sure many of you are privy to that. And so this is what we have on order at the moment. And now for the one that you all have been waiting for, which has just finally got Cabinet Committee of Security approval. That is, of course, everybody's favorite, the ATAGS, DRDO's ATAGS, which is the Advanced Towed Array Gun System, right? Which was first probably conceived without any PSQR. It was conceived as an ab initio thing at ARD. Although some people may challenge this history, but you know how things are anyway. But the point is that it was sort of conceived over a decade ago, and we are yet to see the final order for it. By the way, we are supposed to see an order for 307 units this coming week, according to reportage, right? And because you had the Cabinet Committee of Security clearing a 7,000 crore package deal for 307 units of the ATAGS itself, the howitzers, and 327 gun towing vehicles and associated equipment. Sriram, would you want to take us through that for a bit? Why don't you take us through that?
One second. Let me just put up some details of the ATAGS itself. Then we can walk people through what it can do, what it needs to do. Okay, got it. Second. Yeah, found the old thing. Okay, this is from Defense Expo 2018, if I'm not sure, if I'm not wrong. Okay, so the Cabinet Committee on Security had approved an order for 307 ATAGs. This was on the 20th, 2-3 days ago. This was a part of some 7,000 crores, right? Order for the ATAGS itself.
Crore order, yeah. 60% will go to BFL, Bharat Forge Limited, and 40% to
70-30 split.
Tassel. No, 60-40.
60-40 was okay. Yeah, 60-40 towards Bharat Forge, 60% and 40% towards Tassel. Both of them were DCPPs, development cum production partners. So, see, with at a personal level, when we spoke to both of these companies at various fora and at whatever opportunity we got, the the overwhelming opinion within DRDO or either of these companies who would eventually end up making the artillery system was that it was ready for production at least 5 years ago. As to why we've been this late, I'll let Saurav talk about that. I do not want to talk about the politics within the MOD and the Army. And this was very evident when we spoke to Baba Kalyani also on the sidelines of Aero India 2021. This was 4 years ago, remember? And that was the time we had the very recent case of barrel burst and all. There were a series of barrel bursts across multiple artillery testing programs for the M777 and the OFB gun as well as the ATAGS. And there was a lot of rubbish being written that the ATAGS barrel is substandard. And yeah, like I said, I'll let Saurav handle all of that. The smear campaign against the ATAGS itself. So if you look at the chart itself, right? So you'd see that it can do all of these rates of fires, burst, intensive, sustain, and even mobility at a in a self-propelled mode, it can still do 18 kilometers per hour. I'm sure everybody's seen videos of the ATAGS being driven out of shed and a hangar and all at the facility itself, being driven on its own. So it can do all of that. So when people talk about scoot and shoot, some of that actually helps. But I know, I mean, let's go a little higher up, right? So the ATAGS is a pretty heavy system, 18 tons or something, approximately. So
No, more than 18 tons actually.
yeah, I think 18 was, yeah, the commonly used figure, but yeah, it's a shade over 18. So getting into and out of position will take time. The heavier it is, the heavier truck it needs to get into position and to travel around, right, to wherever it is needed. And the Indian Army has also floated a tender last year for heavier duty trucks which can pull 20 tons, which is in part for the ATAGS order. So that will come in. So the excuse that there won't be enough trucks to haul around something this heavy is a moot point. But like we've said earlier, there are a lot of bridges in the mountains that are rated to 15 tons, especially a lot of newer bridges. So the army's contention that they need a heavy artillery gun on the lines of the ATAGS, which is less than or equal to 15 tons, makes absolute sense. As to why a heavier bridge design could not be used, I do not have the answer to that. Perhaps Saurav does, or maybe we'll figure it out if we talk to somebody in the army. But see, the infrastructure is rated to 15 tons. So you cannot come back and say that we will give you an 18-ton artillery gun and you have to use it in the mountains, right? So you can talk about ground pressure and all of that, but essentially there is a mismatch. I think that is understood. As to how many places are throttled in terms of accessibility by such bridges is a question that I don't think we will be privy to from the outside, but it is a question that has to be taken at the army and MOD levels so that you can arrive at a figure of number of guns that can be used and how they can be utilized. It's not just one particular location, right? If it's between two locations which can take 18 tons and there's a location in between which can take only 15 tons, then you have to think about logistics and moving the guns here and there also. So, but there's a lot more than just number of bridges and weight ratings, if that makes any sense. You have to think beyond one gun and one position. So you have to think about entire regiments being moved across sectors and how mobility works. And again, it's a question of logistics again. So if you have to maintain different types of guns, then you have to have more logistics capability. You have to place more logistics, forward deploy more logistics, have more buried established centers for maintenance and sustenance during fire. It's not just during peacetime where you can do everything out in the open. It has to be under fire. If a gun needs an axle replaced or a tire replaced or a wheel replaced or some component replaced, hydraulics, something breaks, you should be able to do it while you're under fire. So all of these things require thinking on those lines, not just about peace times like you have vehicle repair sheds, right? Like automobiles or even trucks for that matter. These things need to be done when the enemy is firing at you. Anyway, moving on. So like Saurav said, we have 7,000 crore approximately order for 307 guns. Now the question, see, if the order had been placed 5 years ago, we could have asked for 3,000 guns. Today's battle scenario is such that we've found out during the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is that even platforms on the move, even lightly or let's say medium armored platforms, are also extremely vulnerable to all sorts of, uh, let's say, attack profiles for that matter. It's not just artillery, it's not just the infantry with ATGMs, it's also with helicopter mounted attacks, be it the Vickers ATGMs, which are extremely long, 6+ kilometers, as well as FPV drones. I know a lot is said about these FPV drones like the Lancet, which the Russians call Zala, and from the Ukrainian side also. So when you talk about fixed position towed guns, uh, but no matter how mobile it might be, no matter how quickly you can get in and out, you are still slower than something that is inherently mobile, like a truck or an IFV or an AFV, or even a tank for that matter, or the various missile and rocket platforms, like the Panzer, or even a Leopard for that matter, right? Leopard and Abrams and even the Striker. So those are meant to be on the move, but even though those get hit, so having an Kargil style, static placement of guns and expecting artillery duels to go on for weeks together, months together, I personally do not see that happening, especially against the Chinese, let alone the Pakistanis. So what is the future of the artillery is a big question, but that does not mean that the towed artillery itself has become obsolete. Like we spoke about the tank last weekend with Brigadier Rathod. Even he made that point that even though the FPV drone thing that's come up makes it seem like you can hit anything that moves, it is still the artillery which is creating the most bang for buck. The cheapest way to have explosives downrange is still the artillery. So when it comes to sending mass of explosives downrange, it is still artillery that rules the battle, and we've seen this, right? So the kind of usage artillery on both sides of the conflict has gone through is sky high. The Panzer Haubitze 2000, which the Germans are really proud about, they were breaking down because the Ukrainians were running through the barrels in the system so fast, and the Germans could not resupply spares and maintenance packages to them in time. I mean, it was a little bit toward the platform itself was to be blamed to an extent, because the Caesar did not have the same issues, the Crab did not have the same issues. But again, they were running through all of these systems so rapidly that they needed sustenance on double quick time, which again brings to the same point that we keep crying about all the time. Unless you make every nut, okay, fine, 100% is impossible, but unless you make most of the system yourself, you will not be able to sustain a conflict, a high intensity conflict, especially if you have to play against the Chinese in the mountains, or if you have to play both sides, the Pakistanis on one side and the Chinese on one side. And the Chinese will have mass. They make tons and tons of artillery. So it's not like it'll be easy. And we were barely able to keep up with the, we were barely able to keep up with the Pakistanis. Let me put up one more thing. Roughly,
I'll say
this
something.
is what the Chinese have. Right? This was by Peter Wood, picked it up from his Twitter handle.
Yeah, but this is also changing very quickly, right? Because they have other systems also like PCL 161, PCL 171, right? And the PLZ 05 is not the only thing they have now, right? So they are now working on derivatives of what was the PLZ 45, so on and so forth. Now the point is, they see what is the typical life of a barrel, 155 millimeter artillery barrel. Okay, it's generally 2500 rounds, of effective full charge, what is called effective full charge. That is the typical life of a barrel. If you can make something better than that, well and good, but that is typically the global standard. Now the thing is that if you go back to that, if you go back to the ATAGS issue again, you mentioned as to what the army's concerns would be. See, if you're lugging around something over 18 tons, especially in the mountains, obviously you need the sort of the traction has to come from something which has to be equally, which has to be commensurately powerful, right? The
And heavy.
delay, the main delay in, or in the one of the main major reasons behind the delay in the order of the ATACs coming through has actually been the specification of the gun towing vehicle, not the howitzer. The army is quite happy with the howitzer. The real concerns were related to the gun towing vehicle itself. Larger gun towing vehicle that has its own logistical footprint, more fuel has to be used, etc., etc. What is the problem with MBTs? I'm just giving an example. Main battle tanks have a huge logistical footprint on the battlefield, right? So the moment you start looking at prime movers and traction providers which are larger, you obviously have a larger logistical footprint associated with that. These things feed into life cycle costs and general basically operational costs, etc. So these concerns are understandable, but then you have to look at things from a different perspective. What we are looking at, when we look at things, we typically look at things from the perspective of a upfront costs, initial costs for a system, and b life cycle costs of the system itself. But what we could what on the other hand, what we could probably look at is the cost per effect, because that is what artillery is supposed to do, right? Artillery is supposed to deliver effects on the battlefield, shaping effects on the battlefield. Till now, people used to talk about artillery being an arm of decision, but now the rhetoric is of artillery being an arm of influence, right? So artillery is no longer going to be a supporting arm where especially the Indian Army Artillery Corps, where it provides suppressive fire as the infantry closes in on a target to capture an objective, as you saw during Kargil, right? You saw the Indian Army Bofors units in the Bofors batteries, the F877 B batteries, basically providing suppressive fire as our infantry sort of mounted an attack, right? So I mean, not directly over the heads perhaps, but you get the idea. Although in the battlefield it may well come to that also. Now the point is that, so artillery today, and in that era and in that concept, what you have is you try to mass a whole bunch of towed array units within range of the objective, and you sort of pulverize it as much as you can as your infantry creeps forward towards the objective, right? So but today the role of the artillery is changing because of the salience of drones on the battlefield, for both intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, as well as for prosecuting targets. Now drones can prosecute many targets which was typically prosecuted by a medium battery earlier, right, at 20 to 30-kilometer range. FPV drones also are capable of prosecuting targets at these range. So today, counter battery fire is no longer just about some using an artillery locating radar to locate you first, and then launching a and some battery which was hiding till now opening up on your position as you were trying to put down suppressive fire somewhere. It could come from any direction, any profile, and this is an era of what the Britishers are now calling near surface warfare. So in this era, being able to relocate quickly is at a premium. So being lobbing 2 rounds per minute for 30 minutes is now no longer the idea. The idea now is to basically destroy the enemy's assets using your artillery forces and then getting out of harm's way as soon as possible. Now, so what has been seen through the history of warfare is that if you want to, intense fire for short durations produces the greatest casualty effect, right? We know this. So it is not surprising that tube artillery systems also have evolved to lay down a lot of firepower as quickly as possible and also get out of there if possible. So the movement from towed to self-propelled systems and the intermediate semi self-propelled systems like the ATAGS, which is capable of 18-kilometer on its own auxiliary power unit also, right? So the whole idea is to sort of lob as much as you can initially accurately on the enemy's firepower resources or other resources, or mobile firepower tanks as may be, because the equation, the whole artillery versus tank equation, is again in favor of artillery now with the emergence of new kinds of rounds, right? You have DPICM rounds, not just for artillery rockets but for artillery shells also. You have bespoke anti-tank rounds that you can launch now, which sort of deploy shape charges. So there are a whole bunch of options that are available now with 155 millimeter artillery. Now the ATAGS, I'll come to the MGS, but let's go to the ATAGS in a second. ATAGS being able to manage five sort of rounds in 45 seconds as burst fire is actually quite impressive and quite useful in the scheme we are talking about, where we have now moved away from suppression of the enemy, suppressive fire, to destruction of the enemy with your initial burst. So you have to have a proper netted system, you have to have a proper mesh, an ISR mesh, where you integrate intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance with quick fires. And the ATAG sort of meets those requirements. It has been designed for such an environment. First of all, it is capable of burst fire, right? It is capable of what is called multiple round simultaneous impact also. 5 rounds achievable at 50. You have some details being given here with both tail rounds, right? But it can be done with other rounds also. So you catch the enemy in the open with your first volley itself, and you cause maximum casualties. And obviously, accuracy matters. And the other thing is, accuracy in the case of the ATAX is achieved through a range of things. It has an automatic gun alignment and positioning system which allows auto laying and fast laying. It has a muzzle velocity radar, right? It has an enhanced tactical computer. It does not rely on the battery command post for its calculations. See, all those things can be done. So you can fix the target quickly, and you can prosecute the target quickly using the ATACs, which is exactly what you need in the modern environment. And now coming to the whole idea of strategic mobility. Now, why were the bridges designed with only 15-kilometer load carrying capacity, 15 tons in mind? Because of the costs involved, obviously. You see, there is a big, when you talk about 1,000, say you want to build 1,000 Bailey bridges, and the difference is of five, being able to carry 5 tons more. Okay, the cost may not go up by some proportion. It may go up disproportionately for something that can manage 5 tons more. So these are the considerations that come into play when you sort of make these things. Economics is always a factor, however much anybody may deny it. Okay, and then the question of where. Now the ATAGs also, Sriram raised this issue of where. So when you talk about strategic mobility, where exactly do you want to take the ATAGs? Now the ATAGs does not have to go exactly where a shorter range gun may have had to go, right? Because it is already capable of 45 kilometers plus in the plains. In the mountains, that will go up by another 10 to 12%, depending on the basically the wind and
Thinner air.
the yeah, thinner air. I'm talking about the ambient conditions, essentially.
Mm.
Depending on ambient conditions, it will go up. Will accuracy be maintained? Yes, more or less, because see, typically, if you look at an unguided 155 millimeter artillery shell, its accuracy is in the range of 0.6 to 0.7% at over 20, 21, 22 kilometers, typically. Anywhere, that will be the case. ATAGS may manage better than that because it has a very advanced
I,
recoil system.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't want to
just
stop you,
hmm,
but I just wanted to tell one little tidbit.
yeah,
Interestingly, the army got its first high altitude test range, firing range for artillery in Arunachal Pradesh only last year, September or something.
yeah. But they have
Go
another
ahead.
one in Ladakh. They have one in Ladakh also. They have
Okay.
actually anyway. So
Yeah.
okay, but
Sorry.
what you said is still a pertinent point. And the fact of the matter remains is, do we have the right kind of high altitude test ranges that we need for rocket artillery systems? Although we have seen them being tested, including one phenomenal Pinaka guided test where the missile sort of behaved as if it had a mind of its own, but was accurate nonetheless. Anyway, we'll show that video. Now coming back to tube artillery system and the ATACs in particular. So because the ATACs is so long ranged, and we are just talking about ERFB base bleed, we are not even talking about a VLAP round of some sort, right? We are not talking about a VLAP. We are not talking about a VLAP round. We are not talking about the new kind of ramjet rounds which are under development, which will extend this even further, these ranges even further, right? And the ATAGS will be, because the ATAGS has a 25-liter chamber. It is the only thing that is compatible with bimodular charge system zone 7, right? Charge system. We've gone beyond bowl charges, and we are now looking at BMCS everywhere. So this is a beast of a system. Yes, it is a towed system at the end, or semi self propelled, if you like. It's in and out of action time is not going to be as great as, say, mounted gun systems is going to be, as low as a mounted gun systems is going to be, etc. But it's going to be a very valuable asset in the mountains also, because it's going to be further. You will be able to keep it further back and yet hit all kinds of targets with accuracy, especially with precision guided rounds. Precision, because see, the ramjet powered shells will definitely be precision guided rounds. Just Shriram, would you put up that accuracy ray? Yeah, this is the ramjet powered projectile which is in at which is being developed by DRDO, right? So you see a typical sort of ramjet arrangement there, with the intake at front and an aero spike, etc. But anyway, would you put up the range and
Yeah, yeah.
the
One second.
yeah the
The
would you put
chart,
up the
right?
artillery? Yeah, the artillery lethality equation. The lethality
One second.
equation.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll put it up.
Yeah. So while he puts up the lethality, artillery lethality equation, which is going to be important because it will give you some context. See, the one he's putting up is was basically conceived by Robert Alexander at the Georgia Institute of Technology way back in the 70s. Okay, he wrote a paper in which this was there, but this thing is sort of useful even today. And
Yeah.
what you see here, right? And that AL and AT that you see is basically the AL is maximum lethal area of a single artillery round, and the AT is the area of the target. Okay, it's not there in this say, but that is what AL and AT stand for. Now, if you can put in all sorts of numbers for this. NN is a number of rounds in the nth volley, and FN is the fraction of personnel in the target area. You can put in all sorts of use all sorts of data from various conflicts in this, but the one thing that will be born out from this is what I was saying a while ago. Okay, the effectiveness of any artillery volley will be greater if a large amount of rounds land in a small amount of time. Okay, so burst fire and MRSI will show up as having great utility if you go by this equation, right? So burst fire, and so in that sense the ATAGS has very much been designed keeping this formulation in mind. Catch as many people in the open, as quickly as possible. It just doesn't, obviously, giving a semi self-propelled or a towed artillery system at the end of the day, it doesn't satisfy the other requirement which is not captured by this equation, which is quick relocatability. But it's still better than an M777, which has which has no auxiliary power unit for movement at all or anything. It's a very traditional towed artillery system in that sense, and it is not even capable of the same kind of burst fire, and forget about really MRSI with whatever it has. So and it is outranged now by many the new Chinese systems which are coming in, not by the older ones that Shriram had put up on the chart, not by those 122 millimeter systems, right? But the fact of the matter remains is that yes, it can use an M982 Excalibur, M982-1 Excalibur, and the whole series of M982 Excalibur variants, which are very useful, I must say, because if you can achieve a CEP of less than 4 meters with an artillery 155 millimeter artillery round, that's quite something. That's not to be scoffed at. But at the end of the day, it is not really very survivable. It can still be used for what it was. I'm sure the artillery code has a certain doctrine in mind when it has brought it in. But the ATAGS sort of fulfills the requirements of the kind of combat we are seeing in Ukraine. Okay, and now, but the ATAGS is not the only thing under that has been developed and is of course now going to be manufactured in India. And the ATAGS, 40% of those are going to be built at the Tassel unit outside Bangalore, which by the way was set up a long time ago. And Bharat Forge 2 was ready with production, ready for productionization a long time ago as well.
One
So
gun a
you
day.
know, yeah, this is an example of how the private sector can also be patient. So this notion that the private sector won't be patient, the private sector is actually also standing up for national interest. I would just try to reiterate this point. Now, let's now turn to the other thing which is under development on the tube artillery side, which is of course the mounted gun system, which is sort of a VRD. The gun is as an ATAGS only, obviously, and it is a VRD sort of effort along with people like BFL and BML as partners. And see, it has all of the ATAGS features, and its time in and out is also quite decent. 80 seconds and 85 seconds. Now I know some people will jump up and down and say, how does this compare with the Caesar, etc., etc. See, this is a DRDO sort of publicly released document. Okay, so it's on the conservative side, and it's true, it's close to the truth, probably in very difficult circumstances in the desert altogether. What you get in the Caesar brochure may not be what it actually achieves out here when it is tested here. And how rigorously will it be tested out here, we don't know. That somebody else can answer that. We are not supposed to really answer that question. So the point is that in my view, this system, and it's a very modern system. You can see the way the way it stores its ammo, the way it sort of the its entire loading mechanism, everything is quite modern. It's a quite modern, not over engineered as some people are suggesting. It's just that it's not encased. They haven't added to weight by encasing the rear, in a housing, in a so-called protective housing, which will not really protect much in today's battlefield. It'll just add to weight and impair mobility. Right. So, although this does have an armored cap, by the way, and that is the other advantage of mounted gun systems like this, because they sort of try to combine the best features of a towed artillery gun system and a tracked self-propelled howitzer. Right. They basically try to keep weight down. At the same time, they also provide more protection to the crew. So you have an armored cabin in front and stuff like, and other features. You have other parts of the system also, which will be obviously withstand 7.62 millimeter bullets at least. So all in all, this is also a very modern system. According to DRDO's publicly released literature, it's at around maybe 32 tons gross vehicle weight and all that. But fact of the matter is that this is something that is indigenous. Now you will ask, but what about the total indigenous content levels? Okay. Now in the case of the ATAGs, it has been reported that it's 60%. Now I would imagine that the muzzle velocity radar, the A gaps, maybe the optronics, those are probably imported. But now that the thing is actually being produced, and over 300 units of it will be produced, I'm sure those items will be indigenized. The optronics, Tassel has indigenized anyway, to the best of my knowledge, right? The MVR and the A gaps can also be indigenized. It's not such a
Yeah, I'm
big
sure
deal. Yeah.
even if Tassel doesn't want to do it, or if Bharat Forge wants to, sub contracted to somebody like Tonbo, but there are multiple companies who do the EO side of things. So they can get it subcontracted and done within the country if they get orders. Right. So if somebody gets 600 units of orders, so even at 60-40, 400, I mean, 40% of 600 is still a sizable amount. So they can then subcontract it instead of going abroad and importing it wholesale. Especially if during the order, all of these easily achievable components are mandated to be sourced from within India. So that there are lots of data link, radio, interfacing with the army's network. All of that can be indigenized. Right now, just to get the product into a prototype farm and get it firing and prove the whole thing works, for that DRDO can utilize whatever is off the shelf and whatever is easily available. Developing an indigenous version for that, an alternative, will come only when the orders come in. Right, making the whole thing itself is a gigantic gamble, I would say, or a pitch, right? If you want to sound better. So asking for every single item to be indigenized right from the get-go would require the MOD to start a technology development program initially, where all of these subcomponents are developed, and then a go ahead is given for the entire system development. That is not how things work in our system. So we have the system development first, and then parts indigenization happens once you get orders. You might call it ass backwards, but that is how it works. But I'm sure it can be done, because by that time you have companies with the capability to do it. So, and especially if you have a order on hand, then everybody would be willing to come forward and do it for you, and it'll work out, because if you give the order to an Indian company who can do it, then it makes things easier for us. Because, like I said, if 60% of the cost of a platform goes into sustenance and maintenance over how many over decades it has to be operated, then it makes sense to push that money back into your own economy rather than importing maintenance kits all the time.
Yeah, okay. So here's a question. See, an MVR typically operates in the X band. Okay, that's a typical MVR. Now, given what you know about our radar tech, how difficult do you see that?
I
That
expect
being
something like
for
that to be ready very, very rapidly. See,
exactly.
to give you a quick small example, right? Let me just put up the picture. Okay, while I put up the picture, I'll keep talking. So, we have a system called production system for armored platforms, right? So, which among other things use EO systems as well as radars to track incoming projectiles. So, LRD is already working on a system like that, where radar units have been fabricated and they've already been lab tested. So, and these are X-band. So, making a smaller form factor of the same thing in a different array configuration and putting it on a barrel or a mounted gun system should be very easy. The certification and taking it to production might take the usual X amount of years, but developing something is very, very, let's say, बाएं हाथ का खेल, right? At this point in time, and it's not just one lab that is LRD. The companies who want to indigenize this part, right, Bharat Forge or TASL, can directly go to companies like Data Patterns, Apollo, Astra Microwave,
Astra
and
Microwave, yeah.
even Corel. So they had a prototype, APS radar. So, I mean, this is very, very possible. But again, why would any company put in the effort unless they see auto visibility? Because otherwise, there's no point in it. These are not companies as big as Bharat Forge or let's say TASL, where they'll begin programs like this. These are offshoot programs, smaller programs, right? These are not the huge S-band radars for the Navy or X-band radars for BMD systems or something. So unless somebody comes to them and says, we have 300 units that we want to do, can you please develop something for us? Then yes, like you see on screen, right? This is something that Coral had on display, and this is the APS radar that they developed, and this was LRD's design, but they have the capability to design something like this. All of these companies that I just mentioned, right? Coral, Data Patterns, Astra Microwave. I mean, if they can make a FCR for the Tejas and the Sukh 30 MKI, I'm sure they can make a gun velocity radar.
Yeah. And so let us now turn to some of the questions. So we have Arjun Kapoor asking, do you have any idea if the army will consider carrying red on blue exercises based on marker training ammunition and base their assessment system on performance in such exercises? This is a bit specific, and let us not get into this. Although I know where you're coming from.
Yeah, a high-level answer, right? Perhaps.
Yeah. Well, look. Okay, well, let us just apprise our viewers of something. It has been reported that the Indian Army is now working on creating a red unit, right? A red unit specifically for training our personnel in realistic scenarios. So we are working on creating a unit which will have components and structures that mimic our enemies, especially the northern adversary or the eastern adversary, as you might want to call it, right? So how they were, how these things would operate, and how what the rating system would be during the exercise, etc., those we can't obviously comment on, and we should not comment on, right? But be rest assured, I'm sure that these are questions of intense internal discussion, and these are naturally questions that the army are left to the army. And the other question is that there's a follow-on sentence from Arjun Kapoor. He says these should be up to a division level, as no specific training area will be required. Well, yes, again, this is getting down to the nitty gritty of it,
Yeah,
and
and I think
people,
it's
yeah. Hmm.
sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah, go ahead,
just
go
thought
ahead.
about. Yeah, I think it also, I mean, especially the division part of the comment, right?
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of talk and discussion and lots being written about the BCT and how the army should reorganize itself into a fighting force, and taking inspiration or lessons from the US Army's brigade combat team, and how, and even the Chinese have tried to
Composite
mimic
armored
that
brigade.
by
Yeah.
creating their own BCTs, having
Yeah.
brigades which operate on their
Composite
own.
brigades.
And there are also comments on how that is probably not applicable to for us, because we're not an expeditionary force, and a division is a better.
But Sriram, we are doing that anyway. We are also doing the same thing with IBGs, right?
Yeah.
We are also headed down that path.
So yeah,
So
an Indian version of it, if you can call it.
yeah, and see, but where if you look at the Xinjiang military district, military division, they haven't brigadized there yet. They still have divisions. Okay. And see, there are other concepts also. You can look at the battalion tactical group of the Russians as well, where they've tried to do it with an even smaller number of
Smaller
personnel,
unit.
right? Over 1,000. So there, and there, that battalion has doesn't have 800 plus personnel like, say, a standard battalion. It has more than that. But the point is that these are all innovations that are not very cheap either. Okay, if you have to have an integrated arm at a smaller level, and you have to put, so you have to sort of deploy, and you have to train with assets which were earlier divisional, and probably even core level assets now at the brigade level. That means you'll have to have many more of them
More support
also, right?
assets.
Yeah, you'll have many more support assets. You'll have to have more integrated firepower, and obviously it's in the support, on the support side, integrated ISR, integrated EW units. Because I think I read somewhere in the papers that one of the issues that cropped up during these IBGization, exercises and all that, is that it was found that there is a critical need for having signal code units, embedded with the IBG at a pretty fundamental level. This was
Yeah,
reported in the papers,
I
right?
think.
So it's
Yeah,
not, command and control is always going to be an issue. The moment you know obviously, no longer the IBG commander, who will be a two-star general, will no longer be a spectator like he was when he was commanding a full division with 3 or 5 brigades, right? And basically passing orders down to people, and general orders, and ultimately being a spectator during the conflict. That is not going to be the case, but this has its own challenges, right? You were just saying something.
yeah, sorry. The army is on the right track. I mean, they already have taken in all of these observations to heart, and they've tried to start implementing it. They call it eagle on every arm. So, giving ISR capability almost to every infantry soldier, or at least when it comes to artillery, right? So they have a whole host of drones to call upon from the Indian startup and private sector, right from tiny drones to slightly larger ones who can do the ISR for them. So that capability, the army definitely understands it, at least from what we can see and read, right? It was even in the recent parliamentary standing committee of defense report, when they asked the army representative as to what lessons are being drawn from this conflict, and how the army is re-equipping itself to combat such scenarios in the future. And this was part of their reply. As for organic ELINT and EW capability, I don't think we'll hear much. We tend to be very secretive about our EW and ELINT capabilities as well as deployments. But I'm pretty sure if they can do drones, I'm pretty sure they'll do ELINT and EW also. Just that unless we see a picture of some guy with a backpack ELINT and EW system and one of those counter drone guns in their hands during some exercise, you will not see the army tom-tomming its capability, because these are extremely life or death situations, right? Capabilities that determine this. So I don't think we'll hear much about it, but we might see a picture here or there.
So Jaidev Jamwal is saying Xinjiang military region units have been converted into combined arms divisions. They are not like old units of 2020 anymore. Yes, that is quite right. And under that are what are called synthetic regiments, right? They're not called synthetic brigades. They're composite regiments. So they have a division and the regiment structure over there in terms of nomenclature. But of course, they are not your grandfather's divisions, PLA, GF regiments and divisions. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay,
just to add one more point.
Yeah.
So the Chinese under Xi Jinping, right after Xi Jinping came in, they took one look at their own current structures about 10-15 years back, and they said this will not do in the modern age. And he went through the entire military with a Sith and said, you have to reorganize, go look at what the Americans are doing and just do Xerox of whatever they're doing and rework our entire setup from the ground up. So all the earlier group army nonsense got rejigged into different military regions, and the brigadization happened, and they had the Red Force, Blue Force thing happening. And by the way, there was a report, I think it was in Chinatown brief report about a Chinese report. The Chinese report apparently said that when they did the Blue Force, Red Force thing, sorry?
Jamestown brief.
Jamestown. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So the very first few Red Force, Blue Force engagements were absolute whitewashes. They picked a brilliant brigade to do the op war, and they sent regular units against them, and they got thrashed. So then they had to, write up reams and reams of reports as to why this happened, because the guys who were doing the opposition force were excellent, and the regular run-of-the-mill groups that went in for training could not stand on the ground and could not put up a fight at all. So then another round of reforms went in to get the training and equipping part of the regular army up to standard. And after that, there were better engagements. So, like I said, it's just because you have a new Blue Force, Red Force up and ready does not mean that your entire army is ready to fight, at current day standards.
Yeah.
It takes time.
That group armies have now been reorganized into proper combined core level entities. Okay. Now the thing is that, see, we should not be enamored of whatever the Chinese are doing. We should look at what works for us. But that requires a lot of trial and error. And the other thing is, see, and some of the things that were initially touted as great innovations are now being reversed by the Chinese themselves.
Even the BCT itself.
The PLA Strategic Support Force, right? It has now been disaggregated into 3 different sort of quasi services.
After
it was touted that it was going to bring this combined domain weight that even the Americans did not have with their cyber command and their space force, etc. So everything that the Chinese do and are quick to go to town about need not form a template for anyone else. We need to follow our own methods. We need to do trial and error over here. Obviously we can, and there's no point in disrupting some time tested things as well. Maybe changes in terms of their sort of TOE may be more useful than overall reorganization itself in some cases. Now let's go to the last question of the day.
Deng Xiaoping has a question.
Yeah.
Thanks for your contribution, by the way, just to make that.
And by the way, or to all listening, please ask other people, please do subscribe yourself. Please ask others to subscribe. Please click on the bell icon. to get notifications about this sort of podcast. And also do contribute whatever you want to via various means, whether via directly through YouTube or directly to our
Um,
accounts via this
yeah,
particular UPI link. Right? Would you share
it's
the
in the
UPI link? Yeah, share it in
description
the chat box as
chat box
well,
also.
because yeah, share it there as well. We share it there. It's
Okay.
and do spread the word about the program, because I'm sure you want more people to tune in, because this is, after all, indigenization appreciation hour, as opposed to the import appreciation hours that we may or may not have seen over the years. Right? uh, Anyway, let's
Um,
go to the question.
yeah. So the question was, did the army kill the Arjun and Beam self-propelled howitzer? Is an indigenous self-propelled howitzer possible?
Yeah,
As
so
for
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead,
so
you answer.
go ahead. Okay. As for as killing the Arjun goes, see, there is only one decision maker in the country. Everybody else only forwards recommendations. Even if the army may or may not have been behind the Arjun program, ultimately the person with the purse strings is the government, MOD, and MOF. And above them, both of them, the person who controls all of them is the prime minister. So if a project did not go through, it is because the decision making authorities decided that this will be the case. So there are cases where indigenous products have been pushed, right? No matter how much opposition there might have been in the services. And in some cases, the armed forces themselves have pushed for an indigenous solution when an imported solution was being offered. And even maybe uh, hinted at by the government itself, saying this is an option that is available. So I won't name names, but you can figure out which example fits for either of them. As for the beam SPH, I would say it is on lines of the light tank also, where it went through developmental hell, but ultimately there was no enthu or a realization or a vision for the need for a product of that kind. Right. So until the K9 program came in, because we had spent 25 years without buying any artillery gun, and suddenly you had a licensed manufactured gun that could be up and ready in a year, and product delivered within another year or a year and a half. There was no, let's say, enthusiasm. See, you have to realize, I keep saying the same thing again and again. The higher level politicians and national security teams have to chart out a strategy as to what the aim of the country is when it comes to political objectives, long term, short term, medium term, whatever it might be. And based on those political objectives, what are military objectives? And this should be done in coordination with the armed forces and the National Security Council, Secretariat, and everybody else, right? All the think tanks, Buddhijeevis, everywhere. And this will also include MOF, because they are the ones who have to fund it and find funds for all of this. And after that comes the IDS and CDS. Now, all of them have to sit together and see how these targets can be met in a joint warfare scenario. And that is where you have arms development and induction and all of those planning comes. This is step 4 or 5 in the whole hierarchy. So what platform you buy, what technology you develop, technologies might be developed in a vacuum, but what products get developed and inducted, and what form that technology should be inducted into the armed forces has to be derived from this. I hope people understand that weapons development does not happen in a vacuum where I have one laser and I want to pick the biggest laser that I can find and put it on a 4x4 and take it. It has to work in a system, it has to work in a network, and it has to work with everything else, and it has to achieve my objective. You're not carrying a laser just because you want to carry a laser, right? It has to achieve an objective. So unless all of these are done, product development does not happen. I'm not talking about technology development. Product is different, technology is different, right? A product uses whatever technologies get developed or will be developed. So, where is the need? Where is the urgency? Where is the plan for the need for such platforms? Light tanks. We didn't think it was necessary, and suddenly, one fine day, the Chinese come rolling into Galwan, and then we realized that we need something like that. The same thing happened with the canines, right? The first 100 canines that we've got, we had to rush to the Koreans and ask them for winterization kits because we wanted to send it to high altitude where it gets really cold. At least with the T-72s and T-90s, we've had the experience of sending them to high altitude. I hope people get what I'm saying.
Now, to answer the question, the second question, is an indigenous tracked SPH possible? Indigenous self-propelled howitzer possible? Absolutely, yes. You have all the elements necessary for it. You have the ATAGs. You can easily mount it on an Arjun hull, right? And you will get a new Beam self-propelled, Beam 2 self-propelled howitzer. There is nothing that is stopping that really. And this system will outrange the K9 quite easily, and will have higher, and will be another way basically to increase the indigenous content levels of the
Arjun
entire
itself.
Arjun program itself. And now, and by the time this thing is ready, the Datran 1500 will be ready also. So its prime mover will be indigenous as well,
Yeah.
right? So this is something that should definitely be looked at in the planes, because see, there is always a requirement for that a catapult kind of system. We had the Vijayanta catapult, which had a 130 millimeter M46 mounted on a Vijayanta hull, basically,
Yeah.
right? And then you had the Arjun catapult, which had a M46 mounted on an Arjun hull. Now, what you need is an ATAGS catapult, right? Or rather, an Arjun tags, if you like, or Arjun gun system, AGS, right? Arjun advanced gun system. Let's call it a double AGS. This is what you need as the track self-propelled howitzer. This is definitely doable. There's no reason why this should not be pursued, and this is required also, because this will be outrange the Panzer Haubit, which, though obviously vulnerable to FPV drones, etc., and all that, and has a logistical footprint because it is a large track system, has proved to be quite useful, especially against enemy armor also in Ukraine. So anyway, so with that, I think we have to now bring this particular IH to a close. We've gone through a fair bit today, right?
There was
And
one question by
let us now,
Rakesh. Just one quick question.
yeah,
Let me
okay,
see. Yeah,
take
the
question.
upcoming ALTG system would have a 23-liter chamber, right? If yes, would it lower the capacity? Range,
The
I am
range
assuming.
capability, yeah, it will obviously. A 23
Yeah.
liter chamber.
If you can't fire zone 7,
you can't fire zone 7. Any typically 23 liters chambers are compatible with over 380 megapascals, that sort of thing. ATAGS is way over that with its 25-liter chamber. So this is obviously it's going to have lower range capability, but it's going to be lighter, and everybody wins then, right? Because of the 15 ton, it'll come under 15 tons. And you won't have to use very exotic materials. You won't have to use some alpha beta titanium alloy or something for it. You'll manage with stainless steels and other steels, etc., so on and so forth. So the bottom line is that Indian artillery modernization, tube artillery modernization, is on the right track. We didn't have the time to really talk about rocket artillery modernization, which is very important. We'll talk about that in the next episode, perhaps, of Indigenization Appreciation Hour. As always, I thank everybody for joining in. Please do spread the word about us. Like, subscribe, click the bell icon. Spread the word in general. And at the end of the day, remember that we are here to push a sacred cause, which is the cause of indigenization, without which India will not stand tall in the Committee of Nations. It's as simple as that. That is what is at stake. With that in mind, Jai Hind.
thank you. Bye bye.